The darkness comes, an eternal darkness-based fic. Chapter 1. Darkness Invades. It was another typical day at Howard Phillips University. Many of the students had gathered in the one student lounge to watch some of the shows. Usually, the student lounge wasn't crowded for a show, but over the past few months, students flocked into the room when the news came on. There were very few students who didn't watch the news. One of those students, who was there at the time, was James Mulroy. He was a junior at the school and very rarely watched the television, especially the news. He always viewed the news as biased, usually for one political party, or reflecting the public opinion. However, it was the recent story that was being broadcast that bothered him the most. He sat silently as everyone else listened to the newscaster. For those of you who haven't been around the past few months, today marks the sixth month since the death of noted psychologist Dr. Edward Roivas. After being brutally murdered about less than a month after that day, leading investigator Inspector Legras was found murdered. The lead suspects in the case are Dr. Roivas' granddaughter, Alexandra Roivas, and two British citizens, Richard and Yvette Cale. Richard Cale is also being sought for the murder of his own parents, who were brutally murdered. It was also at this time that the Roivas estate began to burn as if set ablaze by arson. As the image changed, James couldn't believe the lie the news was telling. The image on the screen was not of a mansion ablaze, but of it just sitting there untouched. However, he couldn't believe that everyone in the room gasped in horror. He even heard one of the school's jocks say, "That blaze is horrific! They should catch those jerks and kill 'em." He shook his head slightly as the newscaster continued. Shortly after that, it was announced that Mrs. Cale's father, noted archaeologist Edward Lindsay, was currently being sought in the disappearance of businessman Paul Augustine. It is believed by some that both are related. We urge people to use extreme caution if you see any of these individuals, and inform police right away. As the newscast ended, for a brief moment something caught James's attention. He could have sworn he heard a low hiss from the newscaster. He put that out of his mind when he heard one of the female students say, "That was a shame. I heard Dr. Roivas lecture here once. You know, he was more than a psychologist. He also studied the occult." James got up at that moment and started to make his way out of the room. He knew that Dr. Roivas had known about the occult. He had even attended one of those lectures. It had been very interesting learning what things people still believe existed. However, one topic of that lecture still made his blood run cold. The creatures that were mentioned, which even had autopsies done by an ancestor of Dr. Roivas. It still bothered him, and with the odd things he saw in the newscast, there was only one place he felt he could ask the question bothering him. As he headed out of the student center, he passed by another student, Marlene Jacobs. She wasn't a girl he would usually associate with, mainly because while she was drop-dead gorgeous, he was average-looking and above-average intelligence. Obviously not a guy she would want to be with. At least that was his opinion. As he passed her, he could tell she was escorting one of the campus jocks towards her dorm. He figured that only meant one thing. He put that thought out of his mind as he made his way across the campus to the theology department. It wasn't a long walk, but he didn't want to waste much time getting there. He usually walked fast when outside, since in the past months the sky always appeared gloomy, like it was about to rain. In fact, as he thought more about it, it had been that way for a few years, and he wasn't sure why. As he neared the building, he slowed down as he saw something odd. Someone wearing a trench coat was just leaving the building, and as they walked, it appeared everyone was momentarily walking around that person. What was odder still was that those that didn't even look up were stepping out of the way. When the strange man passed him, he almost gasped when he saw who it was. It was Richard Cale, the man the news had named as one of those involved with Dr. Roivas's death. He wanted to say something, to draw attention to the man, but stopped when a feminine voice said, "He is not who they claim he is." He was stunned, and in part wanted to look for the speaker, but the way the voice sounded, he thought the speaker wasn't one that anyone could see. The man then walked by him, briefly nodding, as if he realized he had been seen. James inwardly braced himself for something to happen to him in case that voice was wrong. But nothing did. The figure kept walking, and as he did, he heard the voice again. "He helped stop a danger from coming to this world, but another danger is looming. You've noticed things that seemed wrong, where others don't. Talk with your professor, and you'll learn more." He silently nodded, and then headed into the building the theology department was in. No one paid attention to the fact that he was entering, since while it wasn't his major, the department was sometimes a second home to him. That was because his favorite professor, Professor Marsh, was in that department, and they had spent many times discussing religion and the occult, and finding out that some of the things people viewed as fiction might actually be fact. And after that encounter, he really needed to talk with him. Professor Percival Marsh watched from the window of his office and saw the reaction one of his favorite students to his most recent visitor. This visit was actually something he partially expected, but what he was told during the visit was not expected. He was glad at his student's calm appearance as the man passed, but figured the student was also a bit worried. He turned to his desk and looked at the note the person had also given him during the visit. He had not said much during the visit, but it had confirmed some thoughts he had prior to the events of the past months. In fact, it put everything into a perspective that he had never thought about before, and one he knew that he could share with one of the school's students. He sat down at his desk, pulling out a copy of a book he had purchased long ago. It had led him to his friendship with the late Dr. Roivas, and had led to many discussions about the works of various authors, and the discoveries linked to those fictitious writings. He then repressed a shudder as the words of his last visitor echoed through his head. If those words were as true as he believed them to be, it meant huge ramifications, especially when it came down to who he could trust. Knowing that anyone he knew might have been replaced by an inhuman creature was disturbing, But more disturbing was how they could attack and replace the poor soul, as well as the telltale hiss. It was one he had heard once, in a meeting of all department heads, but he wasn't sure who it came from. He stopped thinking about the hiss when the student he had seen through the window came into his office and shut the door. He could tell he was stunned by the brief encounter, especially as he spoke. "Professor Marsh, you will not believe who I just saw leaving here. I think I just saw one of the people accused of murdering Dr. Roivas. However, as I saw him, I heard someone say he's not who they say." Professor Marsh just held up his hand, and his student quieted down. There is an explanation for all this, and it is both simple and complex. The simple reason for what you saw is exactly what you said. It was Richard Cale who you passed. He had been here to visit me." He noticed the shocked look the student was giving him, and raised his hand to pause the student. "Remember the last lecture Dr. Roivas gave, a few days before his death?" When the student nodded, he continued, "After you had left, we had spoke, and he told me he knew his time was coming. He also told me about some things I was unaware of, including that Mantarak is truly on Earth, and that his end was coming soon at the hands of an old evil named Pius Augustus, who had used many disguises." He noticed that James blinked, as if he realized something, and then said, "You know, I noticed that everyone else didn't appear to see Mr. Cale. Could he be really this Pius Augustus?" Professor Marsh shook his head. "No, but I have seen Pius, but he was wearing the guise of an Inspector Lagros. It was after Dr. Roivas left, and I remember another professor said he was with the police. I saw what he was, but didn't let on. After that encounter, I started to look more into the ancients that Dr. Roivas talked about in his book, but stopped after Dr. Roivas' death." As he said those words, he felt a bit of regret, pausing his research in fear he would die the same way. He sighed and then continued, "A few weeks later, I heard news that the inspector had died. I acted like I was shocked. However, I was relieved. Soon some things changed outside. For a brief time, the sky appeared a little brighter, and then it got darker. It was then I received a letter from the late Dr. Roivas, and in it he warned me that something was coming, and that his granddaughter might need my help." He watched as James got up and started to pace. "Professor, this is a lot to take in. What makes you so certain of any of this, other than what you know of the other occult items? Not that I doubt you, but there has to be another reason to take all this as fact." Professor Marsh nodded, and when he said his next words, he knew he struck a chord. "When Mr. Cale came in here not too long ago, I heard a voice that I had heard once before, shortly after I opened the note from Dr. Roivas. The voice was angelic and comforting." He continued as the student turned to face him. "One thing that Dr. Roivas and I had discussed was the existence of a fifth ancient. It was after Dr. Roivas told me of another incident from his younger days that he had reason to believe that. Even my research had shown that there was evidence of a fifth ancient, but her name had been removed from all known references." He then placed the note in front of his student and pointed to the symbol on it. "Now, if you need any more proof, this is a symbol I just confirmed is the rune for Mantarak." who manipulated events to lead to the destruction of 3 other ancients. Mr. Kale informed me that the coming darkness is Mantarok's doing, and that things are in place for untold things to come forth, and that certain people can stop it, because they have been given the gift to fight it. Those that follow this symbol are Mantarok's minions. I take it you recognize it as well." The young man nodded and walked to the office window, pointing towards a gathering of people at the main hall, which could be seen from his office. He also noticed that Richard Kale was staying clear of the area, but also walking as if no one noticed him. Professor Marsh knew why the crowd was gathering in the area, and whom James was also pointing at when he spoke. "It's the symbol used as the icon of Lucinda Tepes' company. She's been one of this college's main benefactors. If what you say is true, then that means—" He nodded and then said, "It means that I may have to leave very soon. A powerful disciple of an ancient is one that can do anything without fearing normal justice. I also have no doubt that if that is the case, and given Mr. Kale's appearance, she, or another of the ancient's minions, will be coming to make sure I am not around long. Also, if you are able to see Mr. Kale, or notice anything else odd, I suggest you leave the school soon." As the words crossed his lips, he looked down at the crowd so far away and noticed that Lucinda had appeared to notice Mr. Kale, and then looked up in their direction for a moment before looking back at Mr. Kale. In that moment he knew he would have to leave the school before the day was out. Lucinda Tepes had just left the dean's office and was pleased. She had made another sizable donation to the school, as well as checked with some of her associates at the school. She had purposely put some at the school, since she knew the late Dr. Edward Roivas had spoken there a few times. Her placement of those associates at the school was a direct order from her lord and master Mantarok. For many years her family had been in the service of the ancient being, slowly making way for his return. However, over the years the human population grew, and many forgot the being that made their world livable. Of course, she knew the story of the other ancients, and how Mantarok worked to make them disappear, except for one. He had worked to sever any connection to that ancient that was initially made in all the religions. Now, after all this time, she knew it was time for Mantarok to return, and to thin out the herd of the creatures that were the human race. Of course, those truly loyal to Mantarok would remain, but the rest were fodder. Top of the list, however, were the biggest threats, the ones whom Mantarok had used to further his plans along, and who had discovered the truth. The only trick was that since they discovered the truth, they had found a way to hide from her lord. Luckily, as she stood there surrounded by the crowd of students at the school, she saw one of those figures in the distance. Her first instinct was to force her way through the crowd and kill the man. She had seen his face in her dreams, as her lord told her everything about him. It was one of the reasons she kept a specially concealed blade on her at all times. Thanks to the magic infused on the blade, it was never detected by anyone. It also allowed that even if her victim got away, The wound would be so enchanted that it would kill the target within an hour. She then decided to excuse herself, asking those there to let her through. She noticed that some quickly moved, and noticed they were either her minions or loyal creatures to Mantarok. Each of those that she passed, she heard give a slight hiss. When she finally got through the crowd, she noticed the band was now leaving the campus grounds. She started to follow, but in that moment she heard a voice say, "Do not pursue him now. There are others in place to intercept him. There's another who needs to be dealt with now." She froze and quickly muttered a special spell. It worked quickly, and those that were either loyal to her or could see beyond the veil would see her mouth glowing purple as she spoke. "Lord Mantarok, he is one of the ones who knows your plan. What could be more urgent than eliminating him?" She quickly shut her mouth, hoping her words didn't make her master angry. Soon she looked in another direction, which she realized was her lord's way of telling her who the new target was. "See the girl approaching that building?" She nodded slightly as she saw an attractive young lady entering the building with one of the school's jocks in tow. "She is the great-granddaughter of one of those who helped those who now try to stop me. She has the potential to destroy all I have accomplished. She must be eliminated before she can join with the others." She nodded and briefly glanced back in the direction of the man she had seen earlier. It was obvious to her that soon he would no longer be on campus, and she was already aware that a special cop was in the area. With any luck, that cop would be able to stop the man permanently. She then looked at the woman and smiled as an evil scheme came to mind. She quickly muttered another spell. As it began to be cast, she told her special instructions as the creature appeared currently to her. "I want you to go in that building and kill the girl and any who are with her. Make sure you don't kill her first, since if she escapes, she will have to flee or be charged for murder." As the creature acknowledged her orders, she looked around again for the one she spotted earlier. She could not see him. Inwardly she cursed, hoping to find him and wipe him out for her lord. However, there were other matters to attend to, one of which involved a friend. At least that's what her friend thought. The real truth was much more sinister, and she would have to set those plans in motion soon. She then started for her limo and started to call her friend. If things went right, her friend would be loyal to her cause. Otherwise, one of her minions would make sure her friend became loyal to her and Mantarok. Richard Cale quickly left the campus of the university after he had noticed Lucinda Tempest was there. He was not ready for any confrontations with the woman who the goddess, which was the name they called the ancient protecting him and the others, had informed them of being a priestess of Mantarok. Right now, the confrontation had to be avoided. They needed more people to be ready to fight the evil that was coming. When he glanced back, he noticed something that bothered him a bit. At first, it had appeared that Lucinda had noticed him. He realized that she knew of him as well as Alexandra, Yvette, and the others, thanks to Mantarok, and he figured she would give pursuit. However, it appeared her attention was on another person. In part he was thankful for that, but at the same time he felt sorry for whomever had gotten her attention. He was about ready to double back, fearing it might have been the professor he had visited, when the goddess spoke. "Do not double back. The three that are at the school will be coming shortly." Richard blinked as he heard that. He had only been to see one person at the school. Then he remembered the encounter leaving the building, the young man who had seen him. That had to have been the second one. He didn't stop to think about the third one, remembering that time was short and he needed to get back to the mansion and the underground city of Enga. So far that was their only safe haven, since as time passed, what they had access to of their own was under more and more surveillance. The fact that the mansion appeared to be the source of never-ending flames kept everyone away, even Mantarok's minions. Now their only safety to venture out of the mansion was the invisibility spell powered by the goddess's rune, which they had found shortly after being in the underground city on a permanent basis. Yvette's father had been so overjoyed after finding it. Using that rune with the invisibility spell, or reveal invisibility spell as he remembered, did almost the same as Mantarok's, except it lasted longer and only allowed them visible to those who were open to the truth, or very powerful minions of Mantarok. This knowledge had kept him at ease as he approached a cop that was on the other side of the street that led to the mansion. He was certain that all the cops, whether they were minions of Mantarok or real human beings unaware of the other side of the veil, were going to arrest him. Pius, most likely not knowing the manipulations of Mantarok, had set things up to frame everyone. Luckily, the spell always kept them out of sight when they were on the surface. As he passed, he heard something that caused his blood to run cold. He heard the unmistakable hiss of a bone thief. He chanced to glance back and saw the officer was now crossing the street, crossing to make sure his path reached him. It was also then Richard noticed the cop had on dark sunglasses, even though it was not sunny out. Not that days had been overly sunny for months. Richard returned his gaze forward and ran towards the mansion. He had gotten to the point where he could run the distance between town and the mansion in 10 minutes, and that was at a casual pace. Now he had a reason for getting as close to the mansion without getting all the way there. If they got too close to the mansion, the beast would see the truth, since it saw him. He needed to eliminate the threat before it could give out information. However it would do that. He ducked into a small wooded area not far from the estate's boundaries and waited. He knew he was far enough to make it think they were not on the grounds. It was also the right place to pull out his sword, which was now permanently infused with the golden yellow power of the goddess. He then ducked behind a tree and waited. Soon he heard the cop who had been possessed by a bone thief enter the area. The hiss was the only thing that told him he was right, since the creature had found a way to at least master its victim's voice. "Stop in the name of Mantarok." In part, he was thankful that the cop was alone. Otherwise, the creature wouldn't have said that. He was hoping, however, that the creature would not use the officer's gun. He remained behind the tree, listening for when the creature got near. But he spoke to the lone creature. "I'm not going to give in to Mantarok. We had figured out what Mantarok was up to, and we will stop it." He then waited for the creature to near him, figuring he would only have one shot at stopping the creature. He listened as the creature neared, not hesitating as it stepped. He was certain the creature would not have known where he was unless he spoke, and he didn't want a chance at a face-to-face confrontation. It had been months since he had fought a human possessed by a bone thief, and he did remember how they increased some of the attributes of the ones they possessed. He knew the creature was close enough when it said, "You will give in. The world of your kind is soon over. Soon you will all be hunted down. You never have dealt with the true minions of Mantarok." Richard swung his blade, and turned as it swung, which appeared to add to the power of his swing. Instantly the blade sliced through the cop's neck, causing the head to fall off. He stepped back as the head hit the ground, and the body didn't collapse. It stood for a moment, arms outstretched and shuddering. Soon the body exploded in a mess of gore, and what was left standing there was a bone thief the likes Richard had not seen before. While its build was similar to the ones he had seen in the past, this one's blades were jagged, and it had a horned skull as well. The most surprising thing was that the creature could speak as well. It almost left him flabbergasted when it said, "Thank you for doing half my job for me. Now I can get into the city and take care of the rest, since my master's foe won't detect me in you." He realized just as the creature leapt at him what it was going to attempt, and quickly jumped to the side while raising his sword. In that instant he cut off one arm of the creature, causing it to fall onto its side as it missed him. Before the creature could recover, Richard quickly swung his blade again and removed the creature's head. After it fell to the side, he hacked up the body and then made for the mansion. He was now certain that things were going to happen faster than they had thought, and hoped that the three others the goddess had mentioned would make it safely to the mansion. Marlene Jacobs stood in the bathroom of her dorm suite. She had been one of the lucky students to receive one of the special rooms on campus. It meant having a private bathroom, which worked for her lifestyle. For a few years she had been with a few guys, and the guy she was about to entertain was the most recent. It wasn't a lifestyle her parents approved of, but after hearing some of her great-grandfather's stories from World War I, it didn't make sense for her to wait until marriage. Of course, some of her great-grandfather's stories had sounded far-fetched, like the three-headed monsters, walking corpses, and a huge monstrosity in the bottom of a church. However, it had to add to the reason why he thought the world might be headed for doom. If the world was doomed, why care about the consequences of one's actions? Right now, all she cared about was the handsome boy waiting in the main part of the dorm suite. She had told him to wait while she got ready. She had done this for a few guys on campus, and every guy enjoyed the outfit she put together. Not that it would be on long. It was just the beginning of what she was sure to be the most memorable time in his life. As she put on some special perfume, she heard a loud thud out in the main room. She wondered if the guy was getting impatient. She coyly said, loud enough to be heard through the door, "One more moment, and you'll be in for the time of your life." She decided then to wait another moment before opening the door. As she waited, her mind went back to her great-grandfather's stories. She couldn't help but let her mind go back to those. Lately, they had been on her mind a lot. It was still a frightening idea that those creatures existed, but the thoughts had come back after the first time she heard of the death of Dr. Edward Roivas. She had never met the man, but the image she had seen of the one man accused of being part of a murder plot looked just like how her great-grandfather described the man who had helped him. She was sure it couldn't be the same man, but the stories her great-grandfather had told said the man had come from the future. Another thud from the main room brought her back to the moment, with some worry. Usually if a guy was nervous, he bumped something which caused a thud. Never was there a second thud. When a third thud followed, she quickly opened the door and froze at the sight she saw. In the dorm room, holding the guy she had brought in, was a huge hulking monster. It was purplish in color and held the guy in one claw. Judging by the look on the guy's face, he was no longer alive. She then watched as the creature threw the body to the far end of the room. The creature then turned to face her, and she saw that the big, hulking body had what looked like 3 heads on it. The middle one looked like a horrid monster's face, but the one other head looked like a huge eye, and the other looked like a monstrous mouth. It was as if her great-grandfather's stories were very true. Soon she saw purple lightning form between the limbs of the creature, and she remembered the stories of what that meant. She was also thankful that the bathroom door was right next to the door for the suite, and quickly ran out. She moved quickly, running towards the entrance of the dorm. She picked up her speed, inwardly cursing she hadn't put on her shoes instead of her slippers. But there was no time, especially as she heard the creature burst down the door. Inwardly, she also cursed having her fun when no one was around. If others were about, she could have relied on someone helping her, but appeared no one was about in the dorm. However, she now realized that the stories her great-grandfather told were true. She also realized that the man whom the news said was in on the murder of Dr. Roivas might actually know the truth about what was going on, and might be able to help her. Right now, however, she needed to get away from the monster that was now pursuing her.